She was employed here, Mrs. Finch, Mr. Beaumont corrected, his voice now edged with steel. Her papers of manumission granted, years before her arrival at Belrivar, among these documents. Mr. Thorne, for reasons he chose not to disclose until now, chose to keep Samuel's true status a secret, raising him as a slave, albeit one with unique privilege. He states in his will that this was a decision born of complex circumstances, a desire to protect Samuel from a society that would not accept a mixed-race child of a planter, even if free, and to ensure his safety and education under his direct supervision. He believed, in his own words, that the chains of ignorance are heavier than any forged iron. He intended for Samuel to be prepared to understand the workings of the world he would one day inherit before revealing his true birthright. The irony was brutal. Elias Thorne, the master, had enslaved his own son not out of malice, but out of a twisted, paternalistic notion of protection and preparation. And now, in death, he had unleashed a truth that would tear his world apart. Samuel, who had been standing quietly by the door summoned by Mr. Beaumont just before the reading, felt the weight of every eye in the room upon him. He had heard the words, understood their impossible meaning. His mind reeled. Free. His mother, free. His entire life, a lie. He was no longer just Samuel, the slave. He was Samuel Thorne, the son, the inheritor, the impossible master of Belrive. The silence returned, but this time it was charged with a dangerous, volatile energy, the calm before a storm that threatened to engulf them all. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, imagine the other hidden histories waiting to be uncovered. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more gripping tales from the past. The days following the will's reading were a whirlwind of legal maneuvering, social scandal, and simmering resentment. Arthur and Ella Lenina Finch wasted no time. They immediately engaged the services of Mr. Jeremiah Vance, a formidable attorney from New Orleans. Known for his ruthless tactics and his unwavering commitment to his clients' interests, particularly when those interests involved substantial property, their primary objective was clear: invalidate the will. Mr. Vance's strategy was multi-pronged. First, he sought to prove Elias Thorne's mental incompetence. He interviewed former servants, distant acquaintances, anyone who might attest to Thorne's eccentricities, his reclusiveness, his perceived madness. He painted a picture of a man detached from reality, prone to irrational decisions, particularly in his final, ailing years. He argued that the very act of bequeathing a plantation to a slave, regardless of the alleged parentage, was prima facie evidence of a deranged mind and an affront to the natural order. Second, Vance launched a relentless assault on Era's supposed free status. He dispatched investigators to scour parish records, church registries, and court documents, seeking any evidence that she had ever been legally enslaved or that her manumission papers were fraudulent. He questioned the legitimacy of Thorne's affidavits, suggesting they were fabricated in his dotage. The idea that a free woman of color would willingly live and work on a plantation, raising her son as a slave, was presented as inherently piece to cover for a more illicit and therefore legally invalid relationship. Meanwhile, Samuel found himself in an impossible position. Mr. Beaumont, acting as the executor, had secured his legal process that, while expedited by Thorne's explicit instructions and allocated funds, still required navigating a labyrinthine bureaucracy. Samuel was now officially a free man, but freedom, he quickly learned, did not equate to acceptance, especially not when it came with the baggage of Belrive. He was no longer a slave, but he was far from being accepted as a planter. The white society of Louisiana viewed him with a mixture of contempt, fear, and outright hostility. He received threatening letters, veiled warnings, and was met with icy stares wherever he went. His days were now consumed by meetings with Mr. Beaumont, reviewing ledgers, understanding the legal complexities of his inheritance, and trying to comprehend the magnitude of the task before him. He walked the fields no longer as a laborer, but as the owner, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. At the field hands, his former peers regarded him with a mixture of awe, hope, and uncertainty. Some saw him as their liberator, others as just another master, albeit one with a familiar face. He felt the immense pressure to prove himself not just to the white community, but to his own people. Mr. Beaumont, a man of integrity, found himself caught in the crossfire. He was duty-bound to uphold Thorne's will, but he was also acutely aware of the social and legal storm it had unleashed. He meticulously gathered evidence, preparing to defend the will against Vance's onslaught. He interviewed Dr. Reed and Reverend Croft, both of whom confirmed Thorne's sound mind. He verified Era's manumission papers, tracing their origin to a notary in New Orleans years prior, He even found a hidden compartment in Thorne's desk containing a cache of letters between Elias and Passionate, and tender detailing their secret love and their agonizing decision to raise Samuel as a slave for his perceived safety. These letters, written in a code only they understood, spoke of a desperate hope for a future where Samuel could truly be free and educate a future Thorne had meticulously planned for. The investigation was not just a legal battle. It was a societal earthquake. The very foundations of their world were being shaken. The question of Samuel's true identity, of Elias Thorne's motivations, and of the legality of such an inheritance became the talk of the entire region. Every conversation, every newspaper article, every whispered rumor revolved around Belle Reve and its impossible new master. The stakes were higher than just property. They were about identity, race, and the unwritten laws that governed their society. The courtroom in the parish seat was packed, stiflingly hot despite the open windows. The air hummed with anticipation, a palpable tension that made every cough, every rustle of clothing seem amplified. This was not just a legal proceeding. It was a spectacle, a public airing of scandalous secrets that challenged the very fabric of their society. Arthur and Elalina Finch sat stiffly on one side, their faces grim, their eyes fixed on Samuel, who sat quietly beside Mr. Beaumont, his demeanor calm, almost unnervingly so. Mr. Vance, with his booming voice and theatrical gestures, presented his case with practiced ease. He painted Elias Thorne as a man consumed by a late-life delusion, his mind clouded by illness and isolation. He dismissed Era's manumission papers as a clever forgery, a trick orchestrated by Thorne to legitimize an illicit affair. He argued that Samuel, having lived his entire life as a slave, was incapable of managing a vast plantation, and that the will was a dangerous precedent that would destabilize the entire institution of slavery. He called witnesses who spoke of Thorne's eccentricities, his withdrawn nature, his unusual attachment to Samuel. Mr. Beaumont, in turn, presented his defense with quiet dignity and irrefutable evidence. He called Dr. Reed, who testified to Thornton's mental acuity until his final moments. He called Reverend Croft, who spoke of Thorne's deep, if unconventional faith and his unwavering commitment to what he believed was right. He presented the meticulously verified manumission papers of R.A., tracing their legal path, and then he produced the letters. The letters, bound in a faded ribbon, were the heart of Thorne's defense. Mr. Beaumont read excerpts aloud, his voice steady, allowing Thornton's own words to speak from beyond the grave. Letters filled with Era's intelligence, her wit, her quiet strength. Letters from Thorne expressing a profound love, a deep regret for the circumstances that forced them to conceal their union, and a fierce determination to secure Samuel's future. One letter dated just months before Thornton's death was particularly poignant. My dearest Era, though you are gone, your spirit lives in our son. I have made my final arrangements. It is a dangerous path I tread, but it is the only way I see to right the wrongs, to give Samuel what is rightfully his, and to ensure his future, free from the chains that bind so many. Forgive me the years of deceit, but no, it was born of a love that defied the world. The reading of the letters caused a stir in the courtroom. The raw emotion, the undeniable authenticity of Thorne's voice, cut through Vance's carefully constructed arguments. It revealed a man, not mad, but deeply conflicted, a man who had chosen a perilous, unconventional path out of love and a desire for justice. However flawed his methods, Arthur Finch, unable to contain his rage, leaped to his feet. These are forgeries, sentimental nonsense. My uncle would never have written such drivel. He was a man of honor. Your uncle, Mr. Finch, Mr. Beaumont retorted, his voice rising, was a man of complex honor, one that perhaps you are incapable of understanding. He chose to protect his son in the only way he believed possible in a society that would have condemned them both. He chose to educate him, to prepare him, to ensure that when the truth was revealed, Samuel would be ready to claim his inheritance, not as a mere recipient, but as a capable, educated man. He was known for his sharp intellect, his piercing blue eyes that seemed to see through pretense, and a quiet, almost unnerving intensity. He rarely entertained, avoided social gatherings, and spoke little, even to his own family. Arthur Finch often complained that his uncle was as communicative as a stone, a sentiment echoed by many. Yet there were whispers of a younger Elias, a man of passion and idealism who had once harbored abolitionist sympathies, a dangerous sentiment in their society. Whispers of a broken heart, not just from the loss of his wife, but from an earlier, more profound sorrow. Some said he was haunted by ghosts. Others that he was simply mad, driven to eccentricity by his isolation and the weight of his responsibilities. He was a man of contradictions, a master who taught a slave to read, a devout churchgoer who rarely attended services, a wealthy planter who dressed in simple, unadorned clothes. His relationship with Samuel was perhaps the most perplexing aspect of his character. From the moment Samuel was a small boy, Thorne had singled him out. He had personally overseen Samuel's education, not just in literacy and numeracy, but in the intricacies of plantation management. He had treated Samuel with a peculiar blend of sternness and paternal care, a dynamic that baffled and disturbed the other white residents of the parish. Samuel was allowed into Thorne's study, a privilege unheard of for a slave, and often ate meals in the kitchen, a step above the field hands. He was, in essence, Thorne's apprentice, his shadow, his most trusted aide. This unusual bond fueled speculation, but no one dared voice the most scandalous possibility aloud. In his final years, Thorne had grown even more reclusive. His health had begun to fail, a slow, wasting illness that left him frail, but did not diminish the fire in his eyes. He spent more time in his study, writing, always writing. Samuel was often the only one allowed near him, bringing him meals, assisting with his correspondence, listening to his quiet pronouncements. It was during these solitary hours, in the hushed confines of the study, that Thorne had dictated the terms of his will to Mr. Beaumont, a will that would unravel the very fabric of Belle Rive and expose the deepest, most carefully guarded secret of Elias Thorne's life. His death, though expected, had still come as a shock, a sudden quietude after a lifetime of intense, silent presence. And now, his final act had ensured that his presence and his secrets would continue to reverberate long after his passing. Samuel's earliest memories were not of the slave quarters, but of the cool, shadowed halls of the main house. He remembered the scent of beeswax and lemon polish, the soft glow of lamplight on polished wood, and the hushed reverence with which the house servants moved. He remembered the books, rows upon rows of them in Mr. Thorne's study, their spines, a kaleidoscope of colors, their pages filled with worlds he could only dream of. He remembered Mr. Thorne himself, a tall, imposing figure with eyes that seemed to hold both immense sadness and an unyielding resolve. He had always known he was different. While other children his age played in the dust outside the cabins, Samuel was called to the main house. While they learned the rhythms of the field, he learned the rhythm of numbers, the flow of ink across paper. Mr. Thorne had personally taught him, patiently guiding his hand, correcting his pronunciation, instilling in him a thirst for knowledge. That was both a gift and a burden. He was a slave, yet he was educated. He was property, yet he was treated with a strange, almost paternal care by the master himself. The other slaves regarded him with a mixture of awe and suspicion. Some saw him as favorite, a potential spy for the master. Others saw him as a symbol of hope, a testament to what one of their own could achieve, however limited. He was an outsider in both worlds, belonging fully to neither. His mother, had been a house servant, a woman of quiet grace and fierce intelligence. She had died when Samuel was very young, a victim of the same fever that had claimed Mr. Thorne's wife. Samuel had only fragmented memories of her, a soft touch, a lullaby sung in a low voice, the smell of lavender. But he remembered the way Mr. Thorne would sometimes look at her, a look that held a depth of emotion Samuel, even as a child, instinctively understood, was profound. As Samuel grew, his role on the plantation solidified. He became Thorne's clerk, his assistant, his shadow. He sat in the office managing accounts, drafting letters, observing the intricate dance of commerce and control. He saw the master's frustrations, his moments of quiet contemplation, his rare, fleeting smiles. He learned to anticipate Thorne's needs, to read the subtle shifts in his mood. He was privy to conversations, to documents, to information that no other slave and, indeed, few white men was allowed to access. He knew the names of the merchants, the prices of sugar, the details of the loans. He understood the precarious balance of power and profit that governed their lives. Yet, despite this proximity, a chasm remained. Samuel was still a slave. He ate in the kitchen, not the dining room. He slept in a small room off the pantry, not in a grand bedroom. He was called Samuel, Neva, Mr. Samuel. The unspoken truth of his parenasia, truth that had been carefully guarded by Thorne and Ara, was a heavy cloak that enveloped his existence. He had seen the way Thorne would sometimes look at him, a flicker of something akin to regret, or perhaps a deep, abiding love quickly masked. He had heard the hushed whispers among the older house servants, the knowing glances, the subtle shifts in their demeanor when Thornton was near. He had pieced together fragments, intuited the impossible. But to acknowledge it even to himself was to invite a dangerous, destabilizing truth into his carefully constructed world. He knew, deep in his heart, that he was Elias Thorne's son. The resemblance, though subtle, was there, in the set of his jaw, the intensity of his gaze, the quiet determination that marked his every action. But in 1847 Louisiana, such a truth was not a birthright. It was a curse, a scandal, a dangerous secret that could destroy lives. He had lived with this unspoken knowledge, this profound, isolating truth, for years, burying it beneath layers of duty and quiet obedience. He had never dared to dream of anything more than his current anomalous existence. And now, with the reading of the will, that carefully constructed world had been shattered, and the truth once a whisper had become a roar that threatened to consume them all. The silence in the study was finally broken by Elalina Finch. Her voice, usually a controlled, melodic instrument, was now a harsh, grating sound laced with fury. "This is an outrage, Mr. Beaumont, a travesty. My brother-in-law Elias was clearly not in his right mind to leave Belle Rive a legacy of generations to him. It's preposterous. It's illegal." Mr. Beaumont, though visibly shaken, maintained his professional composure. "Mrs. Finch, the will was drafted with meticulous care. Mr. Thorne was of sound mind and body when he dictated its terms. I personally witnessed his signature, and it was attested by two reputable witnesses, Alistair Reed and Reverend Josiah Croft, both of whom can attest to his lucidity." He gestured to the document, its pages still rustling faintly in his hands. "Furthermore, the clause regarding Samuel's emancipation is explicitly stated, and the funds for it are allocated from the estate. While unusual, it is not speaking legal for a man to bequeath property to whomever he chooses, provided the recipient can legally hold it, and Mr. Thorne has made provisions for that." Arthur Finch, finally finding his voice, slammed his fist on the polished desk, making the inkwell jump. "Provisions? What provisions? What provisions? A slave cannot own property. He cannot own land. This is a mockery of everything we stand for. My uncle has been manipulated, or, worse, he has lost his senses entirely." His face was flushed, his eyes wild with a mixture of anger and fear. The thought of Belle Rive's birth slipping through his fingers into the hands of a man he considered property was an unbearable torment. "Mr. Thorne explicitly stated that Samuel is his son," Mr. Beaumont continued, his voice firm. "Despite the rising tension, he provided documentation, sworn affidavits, and a detailed account of Samuel's birth and parentage, which he instructed me to keep sealed until this reading. These documents, which I now hold, confer Samuel's lineage as the natural son of Elias Thorne and Ara, a free woman of color, who, though employed on this estate, was never enslaved." The revelation struck with the force of a physical blow. Ara, a free woman, the whispers, the suspicions, the carefully guarded secret, it was all true. And more, the implications were staggering. If R.A. was free, then Samuel by law was also free at birth. His enslavement, his entire life of servitude, had been a cruel, elaborate lie. The room erupted. Elalina shrieked a sound of pure, unadulterated horror. Arthur roared, his face contorted in a mask of fury. The other relatives began to babble, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of outrage and disbelief. "A free woman," Elalina gasped, clutching her chest. "Impossible. She was a servant. She lived in the quarters." The study's air was thick, not simply with the scent of pipe tobacco and aged paper, but with an unspoken tension that clung to the velvet drapes and settled like dust upon the polished mahogany. Outside, the Louisiana sun hammered down on the sprawling Belle Rive plantation, its heat a stark contrast to the chill that had seeped into the very bones of those assembled. This was no gathering for pleasantries, but for the solemn and inevitable unveiling of a man's final wishes. Elias Thorne, master of Belle Rive, had been laid to rest a week prior, his death as enigmatic as his life had been. Now his solicitor, Mr. Beaumont, cleared his throat, the rustle of parchment in his hands, the room's only sound. He adjusted his spectacles, his gaze sweeping across the expectant faces. Elias's nephew, Arthur Finch, rigid with barely concealed anticipation. Arthur's mother, Elalina, a woman whose stern countenance appeared carved from granite, and a handful of other dissonant relations. Their expressions a mixture of feigned grief and naked avarice. But it was the name that finally escaped. Mr. Beaumont's lips delivered in a voice that wavered, ever so slightly, which shattered the decorum and plunged the room into an abyss of disbelief. It was a name that, by all societal constructs, should never have been uttered in such a context, let alone attached to the legacy of Belle Rive. The gasp that followed was not one of sorrow, but of profound, scandalous shock. For the man named was not a Finch nor any kin, but Samuel, a man whose skin was the color of rich earth, a man who had known only servitude his entire life. The will of Elias Thorne, a document penned in the quiet solitude of his final days, declared that one slave, and one slave alone, would inherit everything. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 2:45, its resonant tone swallowed by the stunned silence that had fallen over the study. Mr. Beaumont, a man whose profession had accustomed him to the vagaries of human nature and the unsettling revelations of final testaments, found his voice caught in his throat. He had read the clause twice, his own eyes scanning the precise, looping script of Elias Thorne, as if searching for an error, a misinterpretation, a reprieve from the impossible words. But there was none. The words were stark, unambiguous, and utterly revolutionary for the year of our Lord, 1847, in the heart of Louisiana. And to my son, Samuel, Mr. Beaumont had read, his voice a strained whisper, born of the union between myself and Ara, formerly of this estate. I bequeath absolutely and without reservation the entirety of my holdings, both real and personal, including but not limited to the Belle Rive Plantation, its lands, its dwelling, its crops, and all its appurtenances, to be held by him in fee simple, free from any encumbrance or claim, upon the condition that he shall, within 1 calendar year of my demise, secure his legal emancipation, the funds for which are to be drawn from the estate itself. The air had become impossibly heavy, each breath a conscious effort. Arthur Finch, a man whose entire life had been a carefully constructed anticipation of this very moment, felt the blood drain from his face, leaving his features a ghastly white. His jaw worked, but no sound emerged. Beside him, his mother, Eli, a woman who prided herself on her unshakable composure, let out a small strangled cry, her hand flying to her throat as if to staunch a wound. The other religious collection of distant cousins and second-tier connections, sex-changed horrified glances, their initial greed replaced by a collective sense of outrage and disbelief. This was not merely an unexpected turn. It was an affront, a desecration of their social order, a slap in the face to every established norm of their world. Samuel, the name hung in the air, a forbidden word, a catalyst for chaos. Everyone present knew Samuel. He was no stranger, no abstract figure. He was a man of 22 years, strong of build, quiet of demeanor, who had worked the fields of Belle Rive since he was old enough to hold a hoe. He was a slave. And now, according to the meticulously drafted will of Elias Thorne, he was the master. The sheer audacity of it, the impossible defiance of it, was almost too much to comprehend. It was a story that would ripple through the parishes, ignite whispers in drawing rooms, and fuel outrage in every planters' association. A slave inheriting a plantation. It was an act of madness, or perhaps a final, calculated act of rebellion from a man who had always walked his own solitary path. The question hanging unspoken in the suffocating silence was not if this will would be contested, but how violently. The battle for Belle Rive had just begun, and its opening salvo had been fired not with cannons, but with a single scandalous name. Belle Rive, the name, French for beautiful dream, was a cruel irony to many who toiled under its relentless sun. Yet, from a distance, it lived up to its moniker. The main house, a grand 2-story structure of whitewashed brick, stood proudly atop a gentle rise, its wide verandas offering a panoramic view of the cane fields as stretched like a verdant sea to the horizon. Flanking it were ancient live oaks, their branches draped with Spanish moss, whispering secrets in the humid breeze. A long, winding drive, lined with azaleas and camellias, led to the imposing front door, a testament to the wealth and ambition of its original builders. But closer inspection revealed the subtle decay that had begun to set in. The paint on the shutters was peeling in places. The ironwork on the balconies showed faint traces of rust. And the once manicured gardens had grown a little wilder, the roses competing fiercely with untamed jasmine. Elias Thorne, in his later years, had been less concerned with outward appearances than with the quiet, internal workings of his domain. He was a man who preferred the solitude of his study to the social world of New Orleans, a trait that had only deepened the mystery surrounding him. The plantation itself was a self-contained world, a microcosm of the antebellum South. Beyond the main house lay the kitchens, the smokehouse, the stables, and the various workshops. The carpentry shed, the blacksmith's forge, the weaving house. Further still, nestled among a grove of pecan trees, were the slave collection of simple whitewashed cabins, each with a small patch of garden where families grew vegetables and herbs. The air here was always alive with the sounds of daily life, the rhythmic thud of a pestle, the distant murmur of voices, the occasional laughter of children, quickly hushed. The smell of wood smoke mingled with the sweet, cloying scent of molasses from the sugar mill. A constant reminder of the plantation's primary purpose, life on Belle Rive was dictated by the seasons and the crops. The planting, the tending, the harvest, each cycle demanded relentless labor from dawn until dusk, often longer during the crushing season. The overseer, a burly man named Silas Croft, ruled the fields with an iron fist, his presence a constant looming threat. Yet even Silas, for all his bluster, seemed to hold a peculiar deference toward Elias Thorne, respect born not of fear, but of something akin to awe. Thorna was not a man to be trifled with, nor was he a man as Lee understood. The inhabitants of Belrive were a diverse tapestry. There were the field hands, their bodies hardened by years of toil, their spirits often guarded yet resilient. There were the house servants, a smaller, more privileged group who moved with quiet efficiency through the grand rooms, privy to the intimate details of their master's life, yet bound by an unspoken code of silence. And then there was Samuel. Samuel was not a house servant, nor was he a typical field hand. He possessed a unique position, one that had always set him apart. From a young age, Elias Thorne had taken a particular interest in him. While other children learned to pick cotton or weed cane, Samuel was taught to read and write, skills forbidden to most enslaved people. He spent his days in the plantation office, assisting Thorne with ledgers, inventories, and correspondence. He learned to manage supplies, to calculate yields, to understand the intricate dance of commerce that kept Belrive afloat. He was Thorne's shadow. He is confidant in all but name, a living anomaly in a world of rigid classifications. This unusual arrangement had bred a quiet resentment among some, a weary curiosity among others, and a deep, unshakable loyalty in Samuel himself. He knew the plantation like the back of his hand, not just its fields and its people, but its very soul, its rhythms, its secrets. He knew Elias Thorne better than anyone, or so he believed. The news of the will, therefore, was not just a shock to the outside world, but a seismic tremor through the carefully balanced ecosystem of Belrive, threatening to uproot everything and everyone within its boundaries. Elias Thorne was a man, cast from a different mold than his planter peers. He had inherited Belrive in his early 20s, a legacy burdened by debt and neglect. Through sheer force of will, shrewd business acumen, and an almost obsessive dedication, he had transformed it into one of the most prosperous sugar plantations in the parish. Yet prosperity had not brought him joy, nor had it softened his edge. He was a solitary figure, a widower for over 2 decades, his wife having succumbed to a fever shortly after their marriage. He never remarried, never sought companionship beyond the necessary interactions of business. His days were a meticulous routine. He rose before dawn, walked the fields with Silas Croft, inspected the sugar mill, and then retreated to his study, where he would remain for hours, poring over ledgers, reading books, and writing in a leather-bound journal that was never far from his hand.